Okay, good evening, everybody. We will make a start. We've just gone 6:30. So just a reminder at the outset for everybody that these meetings are webcast. So firstly, to use your microphones when you are speaking, but also to remember to turn them off when you finish. So otherwise, it will be picked up on the cameras. Just by way of attendances, I've received apologies from Councillor James Wright. I'm not aware of any other apologies from the executive, but also I'd just like to take the opportunity to welcome Sarah Todd, our new Chief Executive, to her first meeting. And as it's her first meeting, and I know a number of you won't have had the chance to introduce yourselves to Sarah yet, I thought it would be nice if we could just go around and just introduce ourselves, but also say what our portfolio responsibilities are when we do that. If appropriate, and also make sure, obviously, that we use the mic when we do that for the purposes of those watching at home. So, obviously, Andrew Weston, Leader of the Council.
Hi, I'm Kath Hines, Deputy Leader, and my portfolio is Equalities and Partnerships.
Mike Freeman, I'm the Exec Member for Constitutional Reform and Resident Engagement.
Hi, I'm Cathy Rooney, the Director of Children's Services.
I'm Councillor Jane Ball. I'm the Exec Member for Children's Services.
Mike Cordingley, Finance.
I'm Councillor Kevin Proctor, the Exec Member for Communities and Housing.
I'm Richard Rowe, Corporate Director for Place.
Steve Adsheader, Exec Member for Environment, Air Quality and Climate Change.
David Acton, Chair of Scrutiny.
Mike Wetton, I'm the Shadow for Children's Services.
Sean Anstey, the Leader of the Conservative Group.
I'm Patrick Mullins, I'm the Deputy Leader of the Conservative Group and also the member for Finance, Conservative spokesman on Finance.
Done, but Shadow Equalities and Partnerships.
And John Lamb, Shadow Member for Health and Wellbeing.
Karen Barclay, and I'm the Shadow for Constitutional Reform and Resident Engagement.
Ray Balcott, Leader of the Lib Dems.
I'm Graham Bentley, I'm Head of Financial Management.
Sarah Radcliffe, Corporate Director of Commissioning.
Judith Lloyd, Executive Member for Health and Wellbeing.
Diane Eaton, Corporate Director for Adult.
Joanne Harding, Executive Member for Adult Social Care.
Hi, I'm Jane Lefevre, Corporate Director for Governance and Community Strategy.
Thank you. Hello, and I'm Sarah Todd. I'm your new Chief Executive, and I am absolutely thrilled to be here. So thank you. I'm looking forward to this, my first executive meeting as well.
Okay, so just to advise, thank you for that, everybody, that no questions have been received from members of the public. Are there any declarations of interest in any items on the agenda? Okay, great. Matters from Council or overview and scrutiny committees. Anything, Councillor Acton?
Yeah, just to let everybody know that the scrutiny committee met on the 12th of February and agreed the AMI report and a set of recommendations, which we have now forwarded to the executive for them to consider. Also, the climate change task and finish group has been set up to deal with the resolution that was put to council late last year, and the first meeting of that task and finish group on climate change will be the 11th of March. Obviously, it is a large piece of work.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Acton. Item 6 is the Trafford Integrated Youth Offer proposal. Councillor Jane Ball, please.
Very much, Leader. Well, currently, as you know, we were supporting 3 key youth services: the Trafford Youth Offending Service, the Talk Shop, and Connections. And we were also supporting Trafford Youth Trust. That was to commission universal youth provision, but that has now terminated. So in November, we proposed to Executive, and you will remember that report, that we have a joined-up offer known as Trafford Integrated Youth Officer, TIO, I'll call it, Trafford Integrated Youth Officer. So the Youth Trust resources were wound up and resources are going to be allocated to meet the needs of Trafford young people. The new offer recognises that young people are complex and each issue cannot be resolved in isolation. So TIO will be accessible to all young people resident in Trafford. They will be consulted on where and when services will be delivered, including weekends and evening access. We will recognise the value of the voluntary and community services, and we will work alongside them. We will have a mix of permanent staff, part-time staff, fixed-term staff, apprenticeships, student placements, and young leaders. The commitment being to embed the voice of the young person in everything that we do. There will be a revised manager restructure, and we have consulted on this. And there will be a detached youth officer. This will be ready to meet the needs that start to can emerge in young people's lives. So looking on page 313, you will see the revised service structure. And if I can just comment on 5.5, the new integrated service will improve young people's outcomes. They will now be able to access a spectrum of wider support across the talk shop and services including sexual health, children's sexual exploitation, missing from home, care, connections, and support for pregnant teenagers and young parents, with a number of externally funded services complementing these services. And of course, we will now have an outreach service putting our detached youth workers into our communities where they are most needed. So summing up, we have an improved youth offer with an increase in staff designed to support our young people as the service is developed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bohr. Are there any questions from members of the executive? Any questions more widely? Councillor Anstey, please.
Well, thank you very much, Leader. Can I welcome the continued focus on young people that I think the report sets out, and it's clearly a continuation of the administration's policy that was outlined in a previous report, as Councillor Mrs. Bohr has referred to. I think just a few points that we wanted to observe in relation to this report. One is, it certainly does appear to be an overly complex set of structures that are being created, and the report doesn't particularly articulate the outcomes for young people that will be achieved as a result of the creation of TIO. So I'd been expecting to see how many young people would benefit, where they're drawn from. In relation to the Youth Trust, how is the engagement with partners, so Lancashire County Cricket Club, Manchester United, going to continue? Because the Youth Trust was a vehicle that was designed to sort of make that engagement a little bit easier. So not quibbling the policy, because the policy is as you all set, but how will those relationships continue in the future? Just last week at the Social Investment Board for Trafford Housing Trust, there was a request from this authority to fund 2 schemes that had been commissioned by the Youth Trust that this council wouldn't have enough money to pay for with the creation of this new service. The Trafford Housing Trust had previously provided £50,000 a year to the Youth Trust, and it could do that through its charitable objectives because it was a trust independent of the authority. I'm not entirely sure how that engagement will continue where the statutory youth provision is provided by the authority. And then 2 final points that I just wanted to raise. One is the report makes reference to a youth offending service post that's being removed. It doesn't particularly outline the implications of that post being removed. And it talks about the voluntary and community sector being engaged, which is a good thing. But again, the Youth Trust was designed to commission, in some respects, the voluntary and community sector across the borough to help it provide further universal youth provision. And again, the report talks about working with the BCS sector, but doesn't explain how. So, like I say, I don't want to be overly critical because I think the intention is pretty positive, but there are just a number of questions that I don't think the report addresses.
Councillor Bohr, please, or Cathy.
I'll start, and then you can fill in the gaps. Thank you very much, Councillor Anstey. Well, the thing is, the provision that we had, there were too many gaps. And we actually need an overall picture of all the services that we have, and we need to pull those together. Because what we found that was some young people were accessing some services, but they weren't aware of others. And it's really important they're aware of all the things that we have to offer. And by doing this, we're pulling those services together. We are very keen to work with voluntary services, and we will be working with them as we did before, making sure that young people are aware of those other services that are there across the borough. And we're very ambitious to do that. In relation to Trafford Housing Trust, it would be helpful if you could send us that information, and we can certainly look into that. I'm sure, Kathy, you may want to fill in some details there.
Yeah, just a few things. I mean, I accept it is a complex structure, but within that structure, we've got a number of statutory responsibilities that we have to fill. So the structure has been designed to ensure that we can maintain those statutory approaches, particularly around YOS and connections and that sort of work. So it appears complex, but actually what it gives you is the management capacity to deliver a quality service. In terms of outcomes for young people, you may remember that the report we presented in November was much more fulsome than this and went into a great deal of detail about how the new approach would be much more supportive to young people, particularly at a preventative end rather than waiting until they either require the services of YOS or even some of the high-end services of talk shops. So building that in particular with the YOS post that has been deleted from the system. The actual statutory cases in YOS has been reducing for the last few years. That post has been vacant for a while and has not had an impact on their ability to respond. So what we've done really is converted that more into preventative and early help type approaches. Again, it's all about trying to pull the work down to a preventative end and still have what you need to meet the crisis if you have a crisis, but do everything you can to avoid young people getting to that point of crisis.
Just the mic on.
Sorry, say that Councillor Bowes acknowledged, the complex area this is, and it's such wide-ranging issues that are involved, the whole gamut, and for the youth, and so it'll be interesting to see, that how this progresses. So I'm good to see that you've got confidence that you can go ahead with this, and we just hope, it's always going to be a complex field, this, and it's not, everybody doesn't get everything right the first time, and we can just say, that it maybe it's trying to do too much, but I suppose it's a way of trying to go forward. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Butt. And yes, it is a complex area. We're not saying it isn't. And there are so many issues that young people have to face now. But I do believe that we will take this forward. And as I said before, we will be developing it with young people when we're not out there on our own. We'll be talking to young people about what they need and what they feel they need and where they need it. So we will be working with them. It's not easy, but we have a lot to do. And I'm not making a political point here, but the loss of all our youth centres has made it much more difficult for us. But we will do our very best, and I'm absolutely determined that this is the way forward. But thank you very much for your support.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Wetton, please.
Just a general comment, really, that to say that I do hope that the structure that's been put together here has some elasticity in it in order to meet rising or varying demands and needs. I think in this modern media age and the way things have changed so much for young people, we do need to be able to try and keep ahead of the game and be able to move quickly to deal with issues that are arising, issues that of need that young people may suddenly have that are arising in today's ways of life.
Just very quickly, I think having detached youth workers out in our communities will also help us, because we do need to be there where young people need that support and whenever, and that will make a difference. So thank you very much for your comments. Appreciated.
Okay, the recommendations are as at page 2 of the report. Are they agreed?
Aye.
Thank you. Item 7 is the Children, Families and Wellbeing All Age Travel Assistance Policy. Councillor Freeman, please.
Thank you, Leader. The paper sets out the approach that was taken to consultation on the all-age travel assistance policy with regards to the proposed policy for 2019-20 and the subsequent alterations we're proposing to make to the policy. The recommendations are as set out that we note the methodology and approach used for consultation, we note the feedback received, we note the very comprehensive equality impact assessment, and we approve the policy for implementation with effect from the 1st of June this year. This has been a very thorough consultation process, and I think we've learnt an awful lot from it. The key for me is ensuring that we have open communication channels where the right information is shared so we can ensure that we transport our children and adults safely. As a result, I've attended every consultation meeting in support of our council officers, whom I'd like to thank for their hard and diligent work on the policy. The changes being proposed are at pages 14 and 15 of the paper and are relatively minor, save for the changes proposed to the transport of children with complex physical or medical needs, which we set out, where we set out new arrangements for the support that will be provided by our passenger assistants. We are proposing that our passenger assistants will no longer on a voluntary basis administer emergency medication to children under their charge on our transport, but instead follow one of 2 care pathways, the emergency care pathway or the epilepsy care pathway, dependent on the condition of their charge. The report clearly sets out why we are making these changes, the most important, I think, being that such has been the infrequency of any of our PAs administering emergency meds, that up-to-date training is an issue, alongside the fact they are not qualified to make the necessary clinical judgment required to administer such medication. Further, we as a council have a duty of care to our staff, and that is paramount as far as I am concerned. Only a very small number of cases will be affected by this decision, and we've already undertaken to work with parents and carers of each and every child affected to find a solution, and to that end we're working closely with Trafford CCG Social Care as part of whole case reviews. As a council, we have a duty to provide travel assistance in accordance with the DfE guidance. It is not the role of the council to provide medical or social care assistance, and if there are such needs, we expect these to be met via social care and or the CCG. I am pleased to report the cost to parents and carers for preschool transport and post-16 transport is not changing, and that in the budget for 2019-20 we have put additional monies to this budget head to the tune of nearly 500k. Our aspiration going forward will be to remove charging for preschool transport because early intervention is so important. Unfortunately, that remains an aspiration owing to ongoing austerity and other funding pressures. Thank you, Leader.
Thanks, Councillor Freeman. Are there any questions from members of the executive? Questions or comments more widely? Councillor Barclay, please.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you for the report, which obviously we note. Could I just ask, the policy is due to start, it seems, in the pre-16s in June and post-16 to start in September. And I just wondered why there was that discrepancy. And if it does start in June, is that not really difficult for parents just at the end, the kind of tail off of the summer term, that they have to undergo those changes just at the end of that term rather than everyone starting a new regime in September? Thank you.
The policy takes effect from June, but it actually comes in September. So it's for the school year commencing September 19. Councillor Barclay, is that okay? We have to approve the policy by the 1st of June, yeah, and it's implemented, but the actual implementation is from the school year commencing September.
May I just ask, as a supplementary question, then could you just please explain the comment? I mean, it's only a kind of minor practical issue, but could you just then please explain the comment on page 33, where it says the arrangements for post-16 travel assistance as set out in this policy will apply for assistance, which will be provided from the 1st of September. So why, if it is all from the 1st of September, why has that been pointed out at that point? Thank you.
It's for clarity, but it applies to everybody from the same day. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's just because they're treated as separate groups within the policy, so that's why it's in for clarification. But the implementation of the policy will begin in September. Are there any other questions or comments with regard to this? No? Okay. The recommendations are as set out on page 1 of the report. Are they agreed? Aye. Thank you. Item 8 is the Brexit economic impact assessment that was agreed to be undertaken at a council meeting last year. So this would normally be presented by Councillor Wright. In his absence, I'll just say a few words with regards to the findings of the report and the recommendations, which just cover how the council could take a proactive approach in responding to the Brexit challenge. Clearly, there's only so much extent to which we can prepare exactly, because none of us know what is going to happen. But in terms of the report that's been completed, I think it's fair to say that research done at an individual local authority level has been quite scant. And whilst the GMCA's carried out some analysis, the gap in analysis at local level is what we've tried to close with this. So the report provides an analysis of the potential economic impact, looking at both leave with a deal and leave without a deal. Clearly, there are nuances within what that deal may end up looking like, but it has to take the most likely option. So just in terms of looking at the economic impact of Brexit, the report identifies that it's likely that in terms of GVA, Trafford's expected to perform relatively poorly compared to the rest of Greater Manchester. That's because we have a number of exporting industries operating within Trafford. It's likely that we will be second out of GM in terms of negative impact on our GVA, 28th out of the 380 UK local authorities. The employment impact, the forecasting model for Greater Manchester suggests that it's likely that there'll be an increase of 12,000 jobs by 2026. However, under a deal scenario, the increase is expected to be halved, which has an impact of circa 550 million in terms of GVA. Under a no-deal scenario, employment growth is expected to fall. So clearly a much more significant impact under a no-deal scenario. In terms of what that means for the council, aside from the impact on jobs and GVA, there are a number of potential issues for us, not least the impact on the council's finances of any slowdown in business rates, a reduction in inward investment, clearly the impact for the council of increasing unemployment, and then the ability to attract workers in certain shortage areas. One impact that would be particularly hard felt would be in social care, for instance, where nationally there is a significant shortfall in the social care workforce. We already have a high number of social care workers coming over from the EU, but clearly they would not meet the £30,000 threshold for people coming over to work in the UK were that to be implemented. I think the average wage for a social care worker is just around the minimum wage. So clearly that creates a particular issue for us. In terms of the recommendations within the report, and they are admittedly quite general at this point, but not for Richard Rowe, who has the pleasure of being appointed as the SRO to monitor Brexit for us, which is one of the recommendations. Also, that there will be a group of senior officers that meet regularly over the next 12 months, and also that the SRO will be keeping the council senior management team regularly updated, with Brexit being a standing item on the agenda. So the recommendations, as I say, note the report, note the measures identified to address the challenges of Brexit, but also to appoint the corporate director of place as the senior responsible officer for monitoring the impact of Brexit in Trafford. Are there any questions or comments from members of the executive? Councillor Cordingley.
Just to let you know that Gus Hill Ward is the subject of a year-long research in terms of Brexit from the University of Manchester, the Social Anthropology School of Social Sciences, Dr. Edwards, who will be taking actually meeting people, taking people through Brexit and seeing the impact on Gorse Hill Ward in particular, which of course includes Trafford Park and majorly affected. And they're looking at it not just from residential, but the whole of the ward itself. I just thought it'd be useful to point out.
Yeah, and clearly, of all of the wards in Trafford, likely to be most affected if there is an adverse impact on the economy, Gorse Hill would be very much up there. Are there any other questions or comments from members of the executive? Questions or comments more widely? Councillor Coggins, please.
Thanks. Yeah, we welcome this report. Despite how grim the reading is, the bottom of page 85, paragraph 5.7, the £210,000, I think, each year for 18-19 and 19-20. I was just wondering if we could get a bit of more information on how this will be spent. The council will be able to decide how to allocate it. It's identified to be spent on resources like recruiting extra staff to ensure council's capacity to provide timely and accurate information. I wonder if we could have a bit more information on that. Thanks.
Richard, could you?
Just to clarify, the 210,000 is in total over 2 financial years, so it's not 210,000 per year. So that's the current financial year and the next financial year. We haven't identified how we propose to allocate it as yet. The senior officer group that we've got established to look at the impact of Brexit and to monitor that, one of the things that we're tasking with that group is to recommend up to CLT how that money should be utilised and whether that's internal or external.
Thanks, Richard. Are there any other questions or comments with regard to this paper? No. Well, clearly we are in a fairly dire situation with regard to Brexit, both in terms of the impact that it will have on Trafford specifically and also where we're at politically with Brexit. Let's just hope that whatever happens, we are able to place our faith in Richard as the SRO. He can solve many things. Whether he can sort Brexit out is a different matter altogether, but squirming in his chair as he is, I'll just say no pressure on that one. But clearly it's at a very sensitive stage. I have a personal view that the current approach of attempting action, but we are where we are in that sense, and the state of politics in Westminster at the moment, generally, I think I'll give that one a swerve in terms of any detail. So the recommendations are as at page 1 of the report. Are those agreed? Thank you. Item 9 is the Combined Authority and Exec Board Forward Plans and Decisions. Can they be received and noted, assuming no questions on that? Thank you. I've got no items of urgent business. Oh, the minutes.
So item 4 for the minutes.
Sorry. So just reverting back to item 4, we've got the minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of January 2019. Assuming there are no comments on those, can those be agreed? Thank you. Okay, I've got no items of urgent business. So thank you very much for your attendance. That brings the meeting to a close.